Somebody you're seeing goes quiet. 6 hours. No text back. Watch what your body does next. Some people spiral. Phone check every few minutes. 3 drafts of a reply, typed and deleted over and over. A dozen ways it could be their fault, or yours, running on a loop. Other people don't spiral at all. They forget the message is even sitting there. When the reply finally comes, it barely registers. Same 6 hours, same silence. Completely different reaction, and it's not really about the person who went quiet. It's about a decision your brain made a long time before you ever owned a phone. There's a name for that decision. Psychologists call it your attachment style, and it comes from a much bigger idea, attachment theory. The short version, as a very small child, you built a working model of what happens when you reach for someone. Do they show up? Do they show up sometimes? Do they barely show up at all? That model never stayed in the nursery. It's running right now, every time your phone goes quiet. For where this idea actually comes from, you have to go back to a war. A British psychiatrist named John Bowlby spent the Second World War watching children shipped out of London to dodge the bombing, separated from their parents for their own safety. He noticed something the era wasn't set up to notice. Being fed, clothed, and kept warm wasn't enough for these kids. Something else was clearly missing, and it was doing real damage. In 1944, Bowlby studied 44 children referred to his clinic for stealing. 14 of them showed almost no emotional attachment to anyone at all. 12 of those 14 had been separated from their mothers for 6 months or more before the age of 5. To Bowlby, that read as evidence of something specific, a system that needs a certain kind of input to develop properly, the same way eyes need light to learn how to see. Bowlby called it attachment, and he argued it wasn't sentimental. It was evolutionary. A human infant can't feed itself, can't outrun danger, can't survive one day alone. Staying close to a caregiver isn't a preference, it's the whole strategy. So a baby's brain builds a system with one job: track whether your person is close enough to keep you alive. In 1951, the World Health Organization asked Bowlby to write up everything he'd learned about parentless children after the war, in a report he titled Maternal Care and Mental Health. His report argued that early bonding wasn't a nice extra. It was a basic developmental need, on par with food or sleep. Bowlby had one more piece to this. A securely attached child doesn't cling forever. They use the caregiver as what he called a secure base, a safe point to return to. That base is what frees them to wander off, explore, take a risk. Take the base away, and the exploring stops too. Depending on the answer that system gets, over and over, in the first year or two of life, it calibrates differently. Bowlby had the theory, proving it needed something stranger. In the 1950s, a researcher named Harry Harlow ran an experiment on baby rhesus monkeys. One a modern ethics board would never approve. He built 2 fake mothers. One was bare wire mesh with a bottle attached. The other was the same shape, wrapped in soft cloth, and gave no food at all. The baby monkeys had a choice: food or comfort. They chose comfort. They clung to the cloth mother up to 18 hours a day and visited the wire one only long enough to eat. Contact mattered more than calories. That result gutted the leading theory of the time, which said babies only love whoever feeds them. If closeness itself was the need, someone had to measure it in actual humans. That fell to a developmental psychologist named Mary Ainsworth. Before she built any lab experiment, she spent months in Uganda, then Baltimore, just watching mothers and babies at home, cataloging every small moment of reaching, crying, being picked up, or being ignored. In the 1970s, she compressed all of that watching into a 20-minute lab experiment called The Strange Situation, built to observe how a toddler handles a brief separation from, and reunion with, a caregiver. Picture a small room. A toddler, a parent, a set of toys. A stranger walks in. The parent quietly leaves. A few minutes later, the parent comes back. Ainsworth wasn't really watching whether the child cried. She was watching what happened at the reunion, the moment the parent walked back through the door. Here's the strange part. Most kids, about 70% in her original sample, got upset when their parent left and were easily comforted the second she came back. She called this secure attachment. Distress is fine because the system trusts the repair. A smaller group barely reacted to the parent leaving or coming back at all. Avoidant attachment. The system learned that reaching out doesn't reliably help, so it stopped reaching. Another small group did the opposite, frantic when the parent left and still unable to settle once she was back, arching away from the very hug they'd just been screaming for. Anxious attachment. The system learned that comfort is real but unpredictable, so it never fully relaxes. Years later, one of Ainsworth's own students, a researcher named Mary Ainsworth, found a fourth pattern in a slice of kids who didn't fit any of the three at all. Freezing mid-motion, moving toward the parent and away from her at the same time. She named it disorganized attachment. It tends to show up where the caregiver was also the source of fear, wanting and dreading the same person at once. All of that was measured in toddlers. It doesn't stay there. In 1987, two researchers named Cindy Hazan and Phillip had a fairly bold idea. What if the exact same patterns show up in adult romantic love? They wrote 3 short paragraphs, each describing a different way of feeling close to someone, and asked adults to pick whichever one felt most like them. The results lined up with Ainsworth's toddlers almost exactly. Around 60% of adults described themselves as secure. Roughly 20% described something that sounds a lot like anxious attachment. Another 20% described something that sounds a lot like avoidant. Disorganized attachment is harder to capture with one tidy paragraph, so its adult numbers are less settled in the research. But clinicians see the pattern constantly, the push and the pull, both at once. So picture your own attachment style playing out in an actual relationship, outside the lab. If you're secure, someone going quiet for 6 hours is just someone being busy. You trust the reply is coming, so you don't spend 6 hours managing it. If you're anxious, the same silence reads as danger. Your attention narrows to the phone. Every minute without a reply gets filed as evidence you're about to be left. Because somewhere back in that working model, closeness once felt exactly that unreliable. If you're avoidant, the silence barely registers. And when someone gets too close too fast, part of you starts looking for the exit. Your system learned somewhere back that needing someone is the risky move. And if you're disorganized, you might do both in the same week. Pull someone in with everything you have, then push them away the second they actually arrive. Wanting the closeness and dreading it aren't a contradiction. They're the same wound. It shows up outside of texting too, in how you handle conflict, how much space you need, how fast you say I love you, or how long you wait to say it at all. Here's what almost nobody tells you about any of this. None of these 4 categories is a life sentence. Your attachment style got built from a small number of repeated experiences, mostly before you could even form a memory of them. It was the correct response to the evidence you had at the time. It's an adaptation, not a verdict on who you are. And it isn't fixed. Researchers have a name for what happens when someone with an insecure attachment style builds enough new evidence to change it. A steady friendship, a stable partner, real therapy. They call it earned secure attachment. Psychologists measure this with the adult attachment interview, built specifically to catch that shift, comparing how rocky a childhood sounds to how clearly the adult can now talk about it. The brain that built the original model as a toddler is the same brain that can revise it as an adult. Enough consistent, safe closeness, repeated often enough, and the old prediction stops matching the new data. The system recalibrates. That's why a relationship with someone securely attached can be quietly repairing, even if neither of you ever calls it that. Consistency is the whole mechanism, not one grand gesture. Just showing up the same way, over and over, until the old prediction finally stops being the safest bet. Researchers see this pattern repeatedly in adults with rocky childhoods and a current attachment style that tests as secure. So here's the whole shape of it. Bowlby said closeness is survival, not sentiment. Harlow proved contact matters more than food. Ainsworth found 4 different ways a young brain learns to handle that need, depending on how reliable the answer was. Hazan and Shaver showed the exact same 4 patterns are still running your relationships as an adult. It was never really about 4 separate personality types. It's one system, built to answer one question: is it safe to need someone? And it's calibrated by whatever answer you got, early and often. So think about your own version of that 6-hour silence. Maybe you already know which one you are. Maybe you spiral, maybe you go quiet yourself, maybe you do both, depending on the week. None of that makes you broken, or too much, or not enough. It's a system that made sense once, running on old information. The next time your phone stays quiet longer than you'd like, notice what your body does before you decide what it means. That gap between the silence and your reaction to it is the one place the system can actually be edited. You didn't choose your attachment style, but you're not stuck being run by it either. There's a name for this in the research too. It's called earned secure attachment. Adults who tested anxious or avoidant as kids reassessed years later through structured interviews, showing up secure instead. Not because their childhood changed, but because enough steady, respected relationships since then rewrote what their nervous system expects by default. It's not instant, and it's not guaranteed just by waiting. But it's documented repeatedly in adults who had every reason to stay exactly where the strange situation first placed them.